Welcome to the Zachrilege Cast podcast, YouTube video interview program that features me talking to some of the best and brightest in the atheist / secular / awesome community. This is episode number 72. We're recording live on October 18th, 2016. I would like to thank Amber Geislinger of Southern Bell Humanism for joining me last week. Check out her show if you want to follow up on the adoption issue that we talked about last week. Adoption in Alabama, not the best combination. I do also want to give a special hello to Corin, who happily was overtaken by Hurricane Odell last weekend. Two of you will get that reference. So about tonight's guest. A few months ago, I talked with author Matthew James, and you know how those authors are, hiding in dark rooms, penning masterpieces, promising to finish said masterpiece before the end times, all that good stuff. So because of one author interview, I had to get another one, and my current guest found me out. So like a good comic book hero, Stephen Hines is a teacher by day, writer by night. He's published a young adult novel, a graphic novel, a one-shot surrealist horror comic, and has several ongoing comic book series. And tonight we're going to discuss his memoir, Rebirth Defect, my journey from Catholic altar boy to teen atheist to adult Christian metal evangelist and back to atheism, which was released in June. Hello, Stephen. Welcome to the show.
Hello. How's it going?
Going well. So will we see any of your benevolent feline dictators tonight?
It's quite possible. 2-year-old Ginger Wildheart is prone to trying to leap onto the keyboard and try to change the language functions or turn on the speech to text at any moment. So if you hear me scream and yell, "Ow, Ginger," at any time, you'll know what happened.
Well, anytime I'm talking to someone with cats, it's about a 50-50 shot. One of them is jumping in the lap before the show's over. I actually closed my door, but my cats only care about the closed door. They don't really like to be on camera, oddly. They're big attention guys. But I'd like to ask you about your religious background and how you've changed your mind more often than a predatory youth pastor at Vacation Bible School. But that's all part of the book's narrative. What can you tell about your story, the shorter version, less than 333-page version of how you went from Catholic to atheist to evangelist to multiple church attender to back to atheist?
I was brought up and raised in a Roman Catholic family, and including being an altar boy and being forced through 6 years of Catholic school and elementary school, and complete with abusive alcoholic priests and psychotic nuns, and quietly became an atheist at the age of 12, mainly through studying global folklore and reading up on mythology, and then around the age of 18, I was going through one of the roughest patches of my life and got sucked into playing music with a keyboard player who was a born-again Christian. He's a player, and gradually through forming a band with this guy and getting preached to this guy constantly while in a very emotionally vulnerable state, got sucked into becoming born again. Played in that Christian heavy metal band for years and preached from the stage and wrote all kinds of really embarrassing lyrics, but mostly good music. And then eventually, after going through changing churches about as often as some people change underwear, I ended up going to a Universalist Bible study where the leader of that pretty much convinced me that everyone was going to eventually be saved and that God wasn't going to torture anyone for eternity. And it wasn't long after that that I eventually kind of reasoned my out and said, you know, this is the first step back to atheism, and that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I was wondering without the hell. It's like, well, where's the hook, man? You got to get the hook.
Oh yeah, without the threat of hell, you'd be amazed how much of the appeal of constantly reading the Bible and praying kind of dissipates.
I mean, I like the nicer version because I have friends who are Christians, and they're usually of that take only the good things Jesus said and kind of ignore that the Old Testament existed, but then they end up being good people. So it's like, all right, however they get there, it seems to work for me. So you sure that you didn't mean to convert anybody with your book?
I, I didn't mean to deconvert anybody.
Convert or we are a religion, right? Atheism.
Supposedly, yeah. I mean, honestly, I do tell personal anecdotes, and then I kind of pontificate sometimes, but I really don't give a rat's ass whether someone believes in any kind of deity, as long as they're a cool person. That's my litmus test. If you aren't a douchebag, then I'm cool with you. If not, I don't care what you say you believe or don't believe in. And if you're an asshole, then I don't want anything to do with you. And I've run into my fair share of those in closed atheist groups on Facebook, where it's like some of the people are just so brutally repugnant to each other. And I just think, then this is why I've never been a joiner of groups. This is why I've always been a loner, and I don't want to be linked up with large groups of people because of crap like this.
That's true. There's always going to be something negative attached. Do want to mention the beverages of the evening. I'm drinking a Dogfish Head Sequence Ale, which is a session sour. How about that? That sounds, highfalutin enough. So it's got lime peel, black limes, and sea salt because it's got that Goza style. And then, of course, the Kirsch Goza, which is a sour cherry Goza, only available part of the year from Victory. I believe that's one state over from you in Pennsylvania. Because you've been an Ohio guy, right, your entire life?
Yeah.
Excellent. So you already mentioned what my next question would have been. I was going to ask, are you sure you couldn't give a rodent rectum about somebody's spirituality? Obviously. We've covered that, asked and answered. One of the shows that I listen to semi-regularly is The Thinking Atheist, and Seth Andrew, the host of that show, which you actually did, you name dropped. That was, I think, the only name drop you got in the book about you listening to The Thinking Atheist and how he used to be like a Christian rock guy and occasionally still kind of listens to it. Do you still, because you had a band and were playing that kind of music, do you still find yourself listening to it now, or is it just you can't go there?
When I was listening to or when I was writing the book, especially the parts about the band that I used to be in, I would put the music back on and listen to it, much to my wife's dismay, and because that's kind of a chapter of her life that she would stay closed. And I'm pretty proud of the music that we did, but the lyrics, for almost all of the lyrics, just make me cringe with embarrassment. But for the most part, most of the other Christian rock that I listened to while I was going through that phase is just so horrible and so derivative of what was, not even currently popular in the secular music realm when it came out, that I just can't bring myself to listen to it.
Yeah, that's the strange aspect of kind of Christian culture. I think that's why the God Awful Movies podcast is so popular, because they're lampooning Christian movies because they kind of are playing off current movies, but they do always seem to be a little bit behind in terms of what's happening, and of course the budgets, although some of them are actually getting pretty big budgets these days. So do you think when you made that transition, kind of evangelical but a rocker, was it for you more about being in a band and it was like, all right, I have to accept this Christian kind of overcoat to be part of it? I mean, do you think you just wanted to be in the band, or do you think that identity was a big part of that as well?
Initially, I would say that was definitely the case, but it didn't take long before I was hauled in hook, line, and sinker to being a complete born-again, Bible-thumping, going to church at least 3 times a week kind of a guy. And I was super serious about the evangelism and convert people from the stage, doing altar calls, and trying to portray an image of a Christian who wasn't walking around with a broomstick up his ass and trying to destroy the stereotype of a Christian who is a sourpuss and can't have any fun and can't have long hair and run around on stage like a lunatic. And most of the time they were pretty sad attempts at pretending to be cool and fun, but we thought we were pulling it off at the time.
So what instrument do you play, and do you still play?
I play bass guitar, and I still play, not as often as I would like, since my teaching career dominates a lot of my life, and then being an author on top of it, and trying to cram in writing and author as much as possible. And since I'm a one-man publishing company, I used to write and record my own songs in the basement, and like program out the drums and play the guitar tracks and record the bass tracks, and sometimes do at least what I would call singing along with it, and sometimes using vocal samples. And eventually I got to the point where I was doing so much as a one-man publishing company that I just got tired of doing all that by myself. And I'm kind of looking for some people to collaborate and do some songwriting with at this point.
Well, I think Jason Camo, guy interviewed, he's big into the music, so that could be a interesting combination. Is it? I mean, I'm sure it's wild to look back at the music, but about the way you now record like a track as opposed to the way it was done in the 80s and 90s. Do you miss the good old days? I mean, you weren't exactly cutting your own tracks back in the day, but the technology now is. Do you like the ability to kind of do that yourself now, to kind of come up with your own music?
I absolutely don't miss the old days, because in the old days we had to either get by with a 4-track or an 8-track with a cassette that sounded completely horrible, unless you're like listening to vintage Big Black when he was intentionally wanting it to sound that way because it was pre-industrial. But nowadays I don't have to save up money and spend money paying somebody by the hour to record me. I can take my time, and this is a lot like painting, where you're just building layers and layers and trying different things and deleting things that don't work, and just adding layers and layers of sound and creating this landscape that's hopefully at least close to what you hear in your head. And I would never go back to recording on tape and the old 80s system ever.
Now, one aspect of being in a band is you have to have a look. So is there like a particular outfit that you want to give another shot, or are you attempting to destroy all evidence of the outfit you wore back in the day when you were in the band?
I would definitely not want to resurrect any of the outfits I used to wear, but I have no problems, having some fun and getting people to laugh at my expense by showing them pictures of me standing about 6 feet high with 6 pounds of hairspray and wearing ripped up jeans with spandex underneath and a ripped up tank top with bleached crosses into it. And we looked ridiculous, but at the time we thought we were completely badass and cutting edge. So nowadays I'm content with having a flat top and having John Lennon glasses, and whenever I can get away with it, wearing a faded concert shirt and ripped up jeans.
Yeah, you kind of have to. It's interesting, you don't think of like a band you listen to and you go, yeah, just wear normal clothes on stage. Like you have to be a different version of yourself almost, and a different version. But I love it. So, did you bleach your own crosses for your outfit?
My wife actually did that for me, and I had a pair of ripped up jeans with our band's logos silk screened all over it wherever there weren't holes in the jeans, and it was pretty dorky. But we were still clinging on to the hair metal stuff, even when the cutting edge Christian hard rock bands we were opening for had already moved on to kind of a 90s look. I remember opening for the band that I changed their name in the book to LaGuardia to avoid being sued. And they had already moved on to like this cool 90s look with the straight hair and no hairspray and sunglasses and headbands, and kind of looked like Extreme. And we still had our hair all poofed out and or wearing women's blouses with men's pants and crap like that. And you could just see them looking at us when we were rolling out our gear and starting our set, and just like, oh dear God, no, this is not good.
You have to imagine the chutzpah of the first band to actually go with that look, because it really did catch on. And if you were a big star in the Motley Crue, Twisted Sister, Rat kind of era, it was like, that's what you did. You looked like that, and there wasn't really much of a choice. So now that you've written your book, you know, about your own experience, when are you going to go back to Christianity to really cash in?
I was hoping to cash in with this book, but since I'm not famous and I published a memoir, I ended up putting it out myself because I pitched it to several atheist publishing companies, and they were like the politest rejection letters I've ever received as an author. Most of them said things like, "You're a really good writer and we really love this manuscript, but we're afraid that with our limited budget we wouldn't be able to, recoup our expenses for publishing it, and we wish you the best." And I was like, well damn, that's an incredibly nice rejection letter, thank you.
Well, I hope people are polite. It's a different era in publishing. My wife works with authors, and even authors that are in like New York Times bestsellers, they need outside marketing help, or you become, your own marketer. Have you found that, publishing your own book, that side of it has been, maybe how much of a challenge has that been compared to just getting the words down and coming up with the final version?
Hardest part for me easily is the marketing, because it seems like I have the complete opposite of a green thumb when it comes to marketing. And usually if I think it's a really stupid marketing idea, then it goes over really well. And if I think it's a great idea, it does absolutely nothing except waste some of my money that I don't have for a marketing budget. So I would love to be able to hand over the marketing reins to someone and just let them run with it, and so I could focus on the writing aspect. But I like, when you're a self-publisher, you definitely don't have a budget for that.
So how did becoming a Christian, or being a Christian, teach you about the flexibility of biblical morality?
Oh, that's a good question. I saw quite a bit of people who would waffle on things when it was convenient, or when it coincided with their personal likes and dislikes, their prejudices. And I'm drawing a blank on things that I wrote about in the book in specific. But one thing I definitely did notice was that if it personally affected someone's life, then suddenly it wasn't such a horrible sin. Kind of like the politician who's completely against gay rights and gay marriage, and then suddenly he finds out that his daughter or his son is and suddenly it's, oh well, this is okay. I mean, I'm going to start crusading for this now.
Yeah, you did notice, like, in all the churches you attended, was it almost more about the personality of the pastor who was running the church as much as the message they were trying to spread?
As far as whether they were able to pack in a congregation, absolutely. Yeah. For me, it was, I wanted someone who was going to teach me something, someone who's going to challenge me intellectually, because that's just how I've always been. I want to learn. I don't want someone who's just going to constantly just tug on my emotional puppet strings every week. And the main churches I wrote about in the book was called VCF, and that was probably my favorite one to go to, because the pastor was incredibly intelligent. He was super charismatic, don't get me wrong, but he would dig into the Greek and the Hebrew and the different translations of things, and just really get into some pretty heavy duty analysis. And I just thrived on that. And then when I couldn't go to that church anymore because of how far away from my home it was, and I had to switch to kind of a local diet version of it that had pretty decent music, which was also a big selling point for me. And then the preaching was nothing but emotional manipulation week after week. I mean, it didn't take long for me to get bored with that.
Yeah, a friend of mine took me to a church maybe like 10 years ago, and I hadn't really been to a modern church, and the fact that it was such a big room and they had like pews in 4 different directions and they had the full band just kind of, I don't know, I was like, I don't know where I am because this doesn't seem like church to me. But did you prefer going to churches where they had the music and it was more of a almost a performance?
I definitely liked it if they had better music, but that wasn't the total package for me, because I definitely was appalled by the mega churches even back then. And one of the churches I mentioned in the book is the one that's mostly famous in Ohio for the touchdown Jesus that was struck by lightning a few years ago, and now we have $5 foot long Jesus that they replaced it. That's in the Cincinnati area, and when we played at that church, it was so repulsive on the inside of there. I mean, it was the pastors had real marble desks and posters of themselves all over their own walls, and there was a giant neon Las Vegas style dove hanging from the ceiling, and you could see that there was more spent on each of the pastors on the staff on their offices than any of us were making on a yearly basis at our crap jobs when we were out in the trenches, trying to take the gospel to heavy metal teenagers. And to us, that was just disgusting, because we were thinking, all this money could be going to the poor, even though it was completely hypocritical, because if we would have made that kind of money as a Christian rock band, if we would have been making like Striper money, we would have been going, woohoo, hot damn, man. Yeah, I'll float a $20 bill to the poor, but other than that, we would have been, hell yeah.
Well, do you think the churches have to kind of add that aspect to get people in first of all, and then get them to stay?
Yeah, it's getting more and more to that point where they have to have like their own version of Starbucks in there, and they're desperately trying to compete with everything that the quote unquote secular world has to offer, to especially to their teenagers. And pretty much any religion is struggling to bring in young people right now, because like Seth talks about on The Atheist a lot, is these kids can fact check you on the internet and find out and call your bullshit. And before, in the old days, you had to go with what your parents and your preacher said, and you're a lot less likely to question things and want to go out on your own. But now they have to try to sucker people in with almost like a rock and roll band with guitar, drums, and keyboard, and have a coffee bar and some kind of hip youth group thing with cool stuff for the kids to do. It's a struggle for them.
Yeah, it's got to be not just that; it's got to be the community for people. So in your career, you've been a musician, a writer, and a teacher. So what do you have you against, like, actually like making a living? What's that all about?
As I say on the back of my book and my little author blurb about myself, apparently I am a latent sadomasochist, and I must continually enjoy beating my head against some kind of financial brick wall and never seeming to break through. But sometimes I wish I could be more of a whore as an author and just sell myself out for a big wad of filthy lucre, but I just can't seem to bring myself to do it.
Because just trying to make it as a musician, I mean, you wrote a lot about your band, and you're trying to do a tour, and you're having to finance vehicles so you can travel around. And even because you're a Christian band, people were telling you, well, you're doing this for God, right? So you don't really need money, right? So it made it even tougher. And just any band trying to make it initially is making no money or barely any money. And then as a writer, well, everybody thinks they can write a book, but few people can. And then when they do, yeah, the transition from manuscript to actually published book to published book that makes money is tough. And no one seems to respect the teaching profession right now. So even if you're making a living, it's not the most comfortable one, but at least you kind of settled down. So how did you make that transition? Like, once the band kind of tailed off, like going, okay, I need a day job, and deciding that teaching was kind of the way you wanted to go?
Well, I mean, when I was in the band, I was working in a grocery store, and right before I knew I wanted to be a high school English teacher when I was a senior in high school, but I was dumb enough to let some people in my family talk me out of it, because I kept hearing things like, "Oh, there's no money in that. There's no money in that. You got to be crazy. Why would you want to do that?" But I knew that reading and writing are the two things that I love the most in life, and I wanted to do that. But then let people talk me into going into business. And so, since I was working at a grocery store, they offered to train me to become an assistant manager. And so while I was in the band, I was trained to become an assistant manager, and which was always a conflict, because of having long hair and being an assistant manager, those are two things that don't coincide very well, especially when you have an asshole boss who is a mega church devotee who brags about how he's going to be rich while paying you poverty wages, but that's another story. And so eventually I became an assistant manager in a grocery store, and after doing that for a few years, I realized that the only thing that I liked about that job was dealing with the teenagers that I worked with, and teaching them skills and everything. And absolutely hated the business part of it. I'm not motivated by profit margins. I'm not motivated by making some corporation richer. I'm motivated by trying to make the world a little bit better place than what I found it, and trying to make a difference in someone's life. So that's when I went back to college and finally started making my dream of being a teacher come true.
I'm glad you made it back and were able to finish finally. So from all your time in the various churches, do you have PTSD from all your spiritual warfare?
Surprisingly, no. Maybe during the first few years after kind of transitioning out of it gradually, I kept finding myself, even when I knew I was an atheist, in times of stress, kind of lapsing back into silently praying in my head and starting to say things like, "Oh, dear God, please help me with this." And then I think, who are you talking to? And spiritual warfare is such a hilarious concept to me now, but it was so real to me then. But that would make a hilarious comic book, now that you mention having someone who is having PTSD from his time in the prayer trenches in the chain at his church, praying for the angels to take over the demons,
and not getting enough assistance with that PTSD.
Fighting through Satan's napalm.
Yeah, and it's I mean, another term is like prayer warrior, and it's almost like you're throwing an imaginary sword at somebody and probably not making much of an impact.
That's what cracks me up about that movie War Room. I've only seen like a little tiny bit of the trailer, but just the whole concept is so comical to me, and apparently it raked in tons of money at the box office.
Yeah, the movie God's Not Dead was showing up on whatever ABC Family is called now, because I feel like they've gone through like 3 names. And I was like, oh man, this is actually on TV. And I was like, trying to explain to my wife, oh, this is a Christian movie that made like $60 million, and it's just awfully hilariously bad, but it's doing really well. So yeah, we're in the wrong industry, clearly. The Christians say that atheists are arrogant, but what's more arrogant than having a personal relationship with Jesus or God, or both?
For me, it's no contest. I mean, thinking that even the concept of prayer, going along with what it says in the Bible, that God is not a man, and so he doesn't change his mind, and that God has things planned out, and he's omnipotent, and yet you're gonna, like I could be down on my hands and knees here in southwestern Ohio, just begging for a blizzard because I'm so tired of my students that I need a snow day, and just how arrogant is that you could be that egocentric to think that the creator of the universe would, well, you know what? I really like the way that guy's begging and pleading today. I think I'm just going to swing things his way, so I stopped hearing him bitch and whine down there in Ohio.
But do you think it's hard as someone who's an atheist now to explain to us never been religious, like what it was like, what kind of kept you in and what brought you in, and why it's still such a kind of a powerful force to believe ex-believers?
Yeah, I do think that it's pretty impossible to get someone to fully grasp it if you didn't grow up in a religious family. One of the guys who read the manuscript for me is one of my beta readers, is a guy I teach with, and he was raised by atheist parents. And so I absolutely wanted his opinion on the manuscript, and he gave me the most impeccable feedback for revising that manuscript that I've ever received. And I had a professional literary agent for a couple years, and he was better than she was. And he would point out, he would reel me in when my sense of humor was getting a little too off color, and he would say, well, as someone who didn't grow up in a Christian family, why did this happen? Why did your family behave this way? Why did you let that manipulate you? And because it was so foreign to him. And to me, it's completely foreign to try to even imagine someone who was raised in a family that's completely irreligious. Because I was just so immersed in it through my whole childhood that I can't fathom that.
Yeah, it's true. And it's kind of trying to understand each other is very important. Do you still have kind of a strained relationship with your parents, years after coming out?
Oddly enough, my dad is one of those people who never goes to church unless it's a wedding or a funeral. But it seems like more in his old age, he's been retired for a few years, and not that he's super old, but he's like 71, and he's kind of gotten a little more. He's always been a deist, but he's never been someone who bought into organized religion. And surprisingly enough, when I came out, I came out to him first, thinking, since Dad never went to church, so he's not going to give a rat's ass about this. And he was really taken aback by it and really bothered by it. And my mom was too. She really doesn't go to the Catholic church anymore, but she still very much believes in God and goes to a different church with her boyfriend. And she seemed like she kind of calmed down about it and came to terms with it until my book came out. And once my book came out, everything that I had written about how she had cooled off about it and we were cool, at the end of the memoir, kind of was negated, because I think it being out and on paper and on Amazon and on sale, and her friends were going and looking and reading the sample chapters, and that made it all public, and that made it all real, and it kind of almost made her feel like she maybe had failed as a parent or something. And we had a pretty tough time when the book first came out, and she was so emotional about it, I couldn't even talk to her on the phone. So I had to actually write her a letter and mail it to her, because she doesn't have a computer, and say, look, Mom, I'm a good person. That I go out of my way to give to charity. I'm a teacher. I devote my life to trying to help kids have a better life. I'm not a bad person. I don't do anything that's illegal. I have maybe 2 speeding tickets in my whole life. I said, if I mail you with a copy of the book, will you read it? Because if you won't read my book and you can't talk about it after reading it and seeing things from my point of view, then we're never discussing this ever again. But if you will read it, then we can sit down and we can talk about it, and we can come to some kind of understanding with each other. And fortunately, she said, mail me a copy of the book. She read it really quickly, which says a lot, because my mom doesn't read very much other than like newspapers and things like that. And ever since then, we've been back to our same relationship where we're super close, and we talk once a week. And she still says, I still can't believe that you're an atheist. You're too good of a person. Your aunt and I talk about it when we talk on the phone, and we think that you're Christian. You just don't know it.
I wish that would snap in a way. It's like, no, it doesn't Christian equals good and atheist equals bad. It's you're still a good person. Maybe that means atheists can be good people, but maybe that connection isn't made. But at least someone's trying. That's the part of like when there's their family issues, and the fact that you can at least talk about it is good. I was kind of wondering, like, doing a memoir, did you think, oh no, these people in my life are gonna read about this and maybe react in a weird way, or you just, this has to come out, like you just felt like you had to get this out?
Honestly, my mom was the only person I even worried about, other than, well, obviously I ran the manuscript past my wife first, so she was aware of all the parts that she was in, and I said, I want your opinion on this, and if there's anything in here that I talk about that's too personal, you don't want it in there, I'll take it out, because she's my best friend, and we've been together over 27 years, and I would never want to abuse her trust. And she's like, I'm cool with it. I feel like you handled everything in a really classy way. And for 2 months until the book actually came out, I had some sleepless nights tossing and turning and thinking, oh my God, I'm going to lose my relationship with my mom. She's going to lose her shit over this when it comes out. And I was kind of lulled into a false sense of security because she seemed pretty cool about it. Whenever I would talk to her about it on the phone, like, look, Mom, my book's coming out, and this is what it's about. And I would pepper her with questions about when I was a kid and what I couldn't remember. And she seemed completely laid back about it. And then for a brief time, my worst fears kind of did happen until I was able to kind of talk her down from the ledge and get her to actually read it and realize it wasn't as bad as people were telling her it was. Because people were telling her that, oh, it's really horrible, and he's just completely ripping on the entire family and making the whole family look bad and making you look like you're super mean and everything. And I didn't feel like I had portrayed her that way. And I even went back and talked to my beta readers and said, look, do you feel like that I made my mom seem like some kind of a monster in this thing because she's really freaking out right now, and I'm out because I'm really close with my mom and I don't want to damage that relationship permanently? And everybody assured me, like, no, you're fine. I didn't get that impression of her at all.
Yeah, it seemed even-handed, and there wasn't a super high focus on that. But when she came up, it was just kind of like, this is how it was and how it is. But you mentioned the most important relationship in your life with your wife, and she went with you through this whole journey, at least through the evangelical part on the way there. How's that been, the relationship? Because you've been through all these kind of transfers, like you gone to different churches and then you kind of became a non-believer, and you may or may not be equally yoked in that regard. How hard is it to kind of navigate that situation and get to a place where you're feeling okay about that part of the relationship?
Well, I guess I'm really lucky because when we first became engaged, we sat down and instead of making a hard and fast set of rules of you are going to do this and you are going to do that and you are going to do this, we sat down and we made a list together of things that we saw our parents doing as couples and said, this is a short list of things we want to never do. We never want to hide money from each other. We never want to lie to each other. We never want to throw the divorce word around when there's an argument. We want to, be in this for the long haul and not do the things that bothered us about our parents' relationships. And so that left us like this big, huge, gaping, wide pasture to kind of grow and evolve as people and as a couple. And I think that helped massively. And by the time we got done with our last church that we were going to, before I started going to the Universalist Bible study that I went to, which was in a guy's home, my wife was just so fed up with going to church and being forced to run the daycare built into the church, or children's church, or whatever they want to call it, and watch other people's demon spawn while their parents were in there, hooping and hollering and praising Jesus, and their kids were biting her on the ankles and whatnot. And so she was just fed up with going to church and having it dominating so much of our life. She was just cool with us not going to church. And then I think I briefly mentioned this in the book, that when I finally came out to her as an atheist, I don't even remember the conversation. I had to ask her. I said, do you remember what happened when I came out to you as an atheist? And she's like, the only thing I can think of is you just got your first job as a teacher, and we're getting ready to move 3 hours away from everybody and everything we've ever known. And that's what's occupying your mind right now? That you don't believe in God right now? What the fuck? So, I mean, now, other than her maybe having to reel me in sometimes when I go on a little bit of a rant and keeping me from going off the edge on social media about when someone says something boneheaded, we have our marital pretty much gone down to almost nothing since Jesus hasn't been the third party in bed.
Jesus, the third party. That's true. It is always around.
It was an awkward threesome.
You brought something up that kind of I forgot about, is the fact that when you're in a church, and especially the kind of smaller ones you went to, you are really involved. Like, you were going 3 days a week, and you were volunteering, like playing in the band and helping out with stuff. It's interesting that the Bible's so kind of pro-slavery, and then it ends up when you're in a church, you're kind of doing slave labor for them because you're not getting paid, getting spiritually paid.
Yeah, it's just like a lot of workplaces where there are a few people who want to get involved and jump in and be on, like, teacher. There are some teachers who they have to be on like 3 different committees, and they want to help chaperone the school dance, and they want to do this and do that and hand out programs at graduation and all that stuff. And then there are other people who it's a struggle to even get them to show up and do their damn job at work, and let alone get involved in anything extra. And of course, there's a full spectrum in between. But once they find out at a church that oh, you can play an instrument, oh, you wouldn't mind teaching Sunday school, oh, you think your wife would watch the kids in the daycare while church is going on, and before you know it, you're shackled down to about 10, 15 different activities, and you have no life whatsoever.
Well, you did teach kids, so was it weird trying to figure out what parts of the Bible to show them and what to obviously avoid?
No, not at the time, because at the time I was very, very guilty of cherry picking which parts I was focusing on as a Bible reader. There were times when I would read the brutally ugly parts of the Bible and the contradictory parts on my own and really struggle with them. But I always felt like at the time, and it sounds really hokey to say it now, that I felt like God was leading me to a lesson that the kids needed to hear, and that God is putting this message on my heart, and this is what I'm going to dig into and build a lesson around and teach them. When really it was probably just spewing out some brainwashing that I had been programmed with.
It's like, how does one read a message on one's heart? It's a bad place to put it. But do you have, because the book came out and maybe during the writing of the book, have you been able to reach out to some of the people you're really close with during your religious days? And what was it like to reconnect? And was it as awkward as it sounds when I ask the question?
Mainly, I got back in touch with my cousin, who was the first drummer in the band, who eventually stopped showing up for band practice and stopped coming because he was really into the music, but not so much into the thumping of Bibles, just the thumping of drums. And it was really fun and surprisingly not awkward to call him and pester him with questions about what he remembered. He was in the band, and after he had been kicked out of the band, he still, for some strange reason, would show up and watch our band practices and was still a good friend to me. He's always been more like a brother than a cousin, and it was actually really fun to get back in touch with him and crack up laughing at the stupid shit we used to do, and to kind of almost apologize for the way that he was kicked out of the band, because we were incredibly self-righteous about our judgment of him and his character, even though as a musician he completely deserved to get shit canned from the band because you got to kind of show up for practice. But as far as our moral quibbles with him, we were being self-righteous dicks, and it kind of felt good to smooth that over, even though to him it didn't even feel like there was anything to apologize for.
That's true. There are few experiences, and I haven't been in a band like that, so the bonding had to be pretty deep, no matter what the spiritual grounding might have been. So as someone who's dealt with anxiety and depression, how did Christianity not help?
Oh, it didn't help in the worst way. When I first started having problems, and it's something that runs all throughout my family on my mom's side. With my mom, it's more depression. For me, it's been mostly anxiety. And I would go to my Christian friends and say, I was in class the other day at college, and I couldn't breathe, and I from a heart attack, and I just felt like I wanted to run out of the room, and now I can't read out loud in front of people, and I can't sign my name in front of people because my hands start shaking uncontrollably, and they would say things like, well, maybe this has something to do with God doesn't want you to become a teacher. Maybe he doesn't want you to have an education. And that just boggled my mind. I was like, why would God be against me developing my brain and becoming more intelligent and helping people? And I went to this pastor who used to be the pastor of the church that I went to, and his whole therapeutic advice was, well, then that's usually evidence that there's some kind of unconfessed sin that you have going on in your life, and you need to repent. And instead of helping me find some real help and counseling and some medication and some cognitive therapy that would help me deal with this, it was, here's this giant hammer with some nails, or this giant club with some nails pounded in it. Why don't you just beat yourself to a fine red mist over it, because it's all your fault.
Yeah.
So it essentially just made things 10 times worse.
Like, I've heard of examples of this happening, but then to hear this, what's happened in your own life is just, it kind of makes me sad for that version of you at the time, because you were desperately needing help, and the one place you would go for help wasn't helping you. But I'm glad you eventually got help, and it seems like you've done better, and you're just having to deal, right? There's no curing of things like this, but you definitely can find a way to live with it.
Yeah, I mean, right now, honestly, I've been going through kind of a rough patch with it, but through science, developing medications that actually help, and through learning cognitive techniques of redirecting my thoughts, and focusing on my breathing, and focusing on how to affect it from a physiological standpoint. I can battle my way through it now, and now I'm not beating myself up and saying, this is all because you did something to let God down. This is all your fault. It's just, no, this is normal. This is a brain chemistry thing. This is something I inherited, and I can ride this out. I've done it before. I can do it again. And, sometimes it really, really sucks being at war with your own brain on a daily basis. But at the same time, I've had a lot of opportunities to help my students who have anxiety and depression issues to get treatment, and talk to them from the point of view of someone who's lived through it. And I came millimeters away from suicide at one point in my life, which is covered in the book. And while that's really horrible, and I wouldn't want to live through that again ever, and I wouldn't wish anxiety on my worst enemy, this has really help some teenagers who are going through a rough spot, and convince them to get treatment as opposed to ending their lives.
Well, in terms of mental health, have you been involved? Is it mainly with students you teach, or do you also get involved in any other kind of mental health groups?
I went for years to a group that used to be called Recovery Incorporated, but it kept getting confused with the Alcoholics Recovery. And I think now they're called Recovery International or something like that. and that was where I learned most of the cognitive techniques on dealing with the symptoms and writing them out and fighting them off when it was appropriate. And I also volunteer over my summer break every year at a place in our area that it's a facility for adults with mental illnesses, and they teach them how to deal with their symptoms, and they also help them earn their GEDs, because most of them dropped out of high school because they were battling their mental so much that they couldn't even finish high school. And they teach them employability skills, and they help them get out of the house so they don't become shut-ins, and get them out and teach them how to have fun again, and how to have friendships. And it's incredibly rewarding.
Well, it really kicks ass, Stephen. I'm glad to hear that you're able to take something that's a really tough situation in your life and you're able to use it to help other people, because there are tons of people that need help. And for some reason, mental health has so much more of a stigma than anything else. If you have some kind of physical problem, people are sympathetic and want to help. But if it's a mental problem, half the time it is like, oh, you just rub some dirt in it, or you can figure it out, even if it's not a spiritual solution. So I'm glad to hear that, I don't know, you've made the most of a bad situation, because it does suck.
Yeah. Two of my biggest passions in life right now are fighting against the social stigma that's attached to atheism, and fighting to raise awareness and erode the stigma with mental illness.
So fighting the stigma of being an out atheist, what were some of the situations you dealt with when you decided to be more public and share that you're an atheist with some of your coworkers?
Ooh, let's see. One time I had a particularly kind of nasty run-in with a parent who was hyper-religious about a piece of literature that I used in class, and so I rewarded myself by going on the it's the Darwin Fish website. Do you know what I'm talking about? They sell the Thinking Atheist guys stuff now, and
is that Evolve Fish?
Yeah, Evolve Fish. Thank you. And I ordered a little yellow sign that looked like one of those baby on board signs, and it said atheist on board, and I put it in the window of my work car, and I showed up to work with this in my window, and immediately one of the ladies I teach with, well, she was on the tech staff, but she saw it in my car window, and I'm lugging in, a couple big heavy boxes of teaching materials, and she was at the door, and she kind of paused, and she looked at me and said, well, I don't know if I should hold the door open for someone who's an atheist. And I was just kind of, whoa, first thing in the morning, I'm not awake, and I wasn't anticipating any kind of confrontation, and just kind of let it slide. And she followed me in and was following me all the way down the hallway while I'm lugging my teaching materials through the school. And I can't believe it. I mean, people sell signs like that. I mean, you paid money for that thing. I mean, why would you be proud of that? And she just kept going on and on. And finally, finally I'd had enough, and I just snapped and looked at her and said, look, the sign says atheist on board, not rapist on board. Get over it. And she shut up and has left me alone ever since. And I had another teacher who's a science teacher, ironically enough, who stormed down to my classroom and got in my face over that sign, and said she wanted to get a sign or a sticker for the other side of my car that said God doesn't believe in atheists, and she could to bait me into an argument in the hallway right in front of students. And I don't know how I did it, but somehow I just crossed my arms and smiled at her and let her blow off steam, and I didn't take the bait, and since I wasn't putting any gasoline on her fire, she kind of stalked off to her little lair and left me alone.
Yeah, I don't know how I do with interpersonal conflict like that, because I've dealt with just online stuff, and usually I go the wrong way with that. But that's how things tend to go online. I mean, because I'm in a local kind of secular group, and we do a kind of a Christmas exchange, and I got a Flying Spaghetti Monster sign that I put in the back of my car, but nobody in Georgia or most of the country knows what the FSM is. So they just see that and go, huh, instead of, oh no, you're the devil.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, yeah, I can't even think, and I wouldn't ask you to be the ultimate arbiter of like, how do you deal with these situations? Because it's got to be situational, and it's maybe like when people came out as gay, and eventually you're like, oh, I know a gay person, and I liked them before I knew they were gay, so maybe that'll transition to, oh, I like this person before I knew they were an atheist, so they aren't automatically a bad person. But I don't know. I don't know. In a way, because it's not happening to me, I find those kind of interactions amusing, but it is going to be somewhat terrifying in a way because you're dealing with your job. I mean, you worked really hard to get into this position, and for anything to jeopardize it would be tough. And it's thinking, well, you're in Ohio, you're in the north, but that doesn't really seem to matter. I mean, other than like city centers, we're a pretty religious country, pretty much all the way.
Oh yeah, I live in John Boehner's hometown, so I mean, everything's pretty much hyper religious here too. I mean, we may not be in the thick of the Bible Belt, but we're definitely tucked into it, and it's crazy. Like, one of my coworkers, when I first put that sign on my car windows, looked at me and he's like, "Wow, you're really brave, man." And I said, "Why?" He's like, "Well," he said, I'm nervous every day coming to work, and I just have a Darwin sticker on the back of my truck." I said, "Well, what are they going to do about it?" And he's like, "Well, they can make me take it down. I've been hauled into the office over similar things before, and they made me change it." And I said, I'd like to sincerely see them try to get me to take that sign out of my window, because they wouldn't have a leg to stand on in court, because I could call the ACLU. I wouldn't want to be a litigious kind of a person, but you could easily call the ACLU and say, well, fine, then every person who wears a cross necklace in this building and has a Christian country a bumper sticker on their damn car or whatever, they're gonna have to take that crap down too. Because I leave my personal beliefs in the parking lot on my car. I don't bring them into my classroom, unlike some of the Christians I teach with who try to push their religion on students sometimes.
Yeah, I could see that happening a lot at school. We're actually getting close to the hour. It just goes by so fast. But as someone who's gotten a book out there, do you have some favorite like atheist or secular writers that you're a big fan of?
Christopher Hitchens has to be number one. I love Hitch. You're
not going to get a blurb out of him, though.
No,
sorry, too soon.
I joked about that with an atheist friend of mine who read my manuscript, and I was like, I'm trying to get blurbs from people, and he's like, well, you could always do one from Hitch. He's like, he's not going to deny that he said it.
Yeah, there's not going to be a lawsuit involved.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah. I like Sam Harris, even though he's a lot more militant than I would ever be with his approach to things. But I do like thought processes and the points he raises. I read Seth Andrews' first book, but I haven't read his second one yet, and I really liked his first one. I tried to get into Dawkins, but for me it was just too dry. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, for me, that's about it. Some of the really sciencey stuff can be hard to get into for me. It's more usually somebody's personal story, or if you want to really get into the details, someone like Bart Ehrman, who's talking about the old history of the Christianity and the different versions.
I forgot Bart. I love Bart's stuff. And Timothy Frake, are you familiar with him?
No.
The only book I've read by him is called The Jesus Mysteries. And he has several others. I just haven't gotten around to reading them yet. And in that book, he proves that Christianity was just one of the mystery cults that were big in the area at the time. It just happened to latch onto Jesus as the object of the mystery cult. And fascinating book if you ever get a chance to pick it up.
Sounds right down the alley. Now, I know this is, like the pinnacle of your podcasting career, but is there another podcast that you're a big fan of that you'd like to be on to talk about your book?
I would have to say I would absolutely love to be on Cognitive Dissonance. I don't know if you're a fan or not.
I listened to them today. I've been on and off with their show, but because of the vulgarity for charity kind of connection with Scathing Atheist, got back on the train. And it's impressive. All these shows have been around for years, and they managed to, publish pretty much on schedule with quality stuff.
Yeah, there are times when they have taken their sense of humor farther than I'm willing to follow them, but for the most part, they have me in stitches, cracking up, laughing, and they're intelligent, and I love the fact that they break so many of the like liberal stereotypes, because they shoot guns and they're politically incorrect, and those are two things that those damn hippie liberals are never supposed to ever be.
True, yeah. And at last year's ReasonCon, I gave Tom a beer, so that's something.
Cool.
Got to meet him. I mean, that's where I met pretty much everybody I can remember. It was a pretty good one. So where can people find your book and kind of get in touch with you and just keep it going?
My website is www.stephenhines.org, and I couldn't get .com because apparently there's some other Stephen Hines who writes about Little House on the Prairie, and that's definitely not me.
Okay.
And I'm on Twitter. My handle is StephenHines67, and same handle on Instagram. My memoir, Rebirth Defect, is on Amazon. It's in paperback. It's in Kindle format and audiobook format, read by me. And I also have an Etsy shop. And Reasonist Inc., an atheist T-shirt company, just recently picked up my memoir and put it on sale on their website.
Excellent. I didn't know you and me and like 3 other people are all the American atheists who are on Twitter. For some reason, I find American atheists tend to end up on Facebook more than Twitter, so I should have asked before. But okay, that's good. All those links and more will be available in the show notes. So look at the show notes. Some shows aren't so good with their notes. I try to cover as much as I possibly can and more on there. So if you want to support this show, you go to patreon.com/Zachrilege. Much like Stephen, I'm not so great with the marketing, so I do ZACHRILEGE to spell that. You can follow me on Twitter, just Zachrilege. Like my Zachrilege Cast page on Facebook. Send all hate mail to zachrilege.cast@gmail.com. Thanks again to Stephen for being on tonight and sharing the book. And it's a really good book. I read through it probably over the last weekend and zoomed through it. It's a great story, so get on that, folks. So for everybody listening, stay safe, and if you need to chat, I'm available. If you're an atheist and feel alone, you are not alone. Reach out. Let's chat and get that human connectiveness that keeps people coming back every Sunday. Stay skeptical. I love all y'all, and good night.